Hey, welcome back to another Just 15 Mins. Or minutes. Oh, it's getting old, that, isn't it? Okay, so what have we got this time around? Well, what if I told you, a bit like the Matrix? No, I was trying to do the Matrix voice then, anyway. What if I told you that you can, with very little effort, have a database and have it with a REST or GraphQL API pretty much instantly. And better still, would you like a 32 gig SQL database for free? And when I say for free, I mean for free, for forever. On Azure, as long as you've got an Azure account that you do not need to pay for. And, you know, we'll address some concerns about costs and things in a sec. But the fact of the matter is that's a 32 gig SQL database hosted in Azure with backups, and it's all free. And by the way, what I'm about to show you today, even though it's about Azure databases, it's not, and I'll show you. You can actually use MySQL, Postgres, and a few other options too. So what is it? What am I trying to talk about? So imagine you've got a database, whether it is in Azure or even if it's local, basically. Now, normally you want to write an application that is going to interact with that database. And sure enough, you will still need to do that in a lot of cases, of course, is you're going to write an application, you're going to do whatever. But if you're just interacting with that database, and in my line of work with integration and a few things like that, being able to access the database via a secure, and I want to emphasize that, a secure REST or GraphQL endpoint is quite appealing because, if you've got, obviously, if the database is on the same network or the same, system that you're working on, then there's not a problem. But if that database is on another network, and a completely different customer or something like that, and you just need to get secure access to certain aspects of that database. And there's another key. What I'm about to show you doesn't by default just expose the whole database. You have to be very specific which tables, even which columns you want to be made available. So what am I talking about? I'm talking about Data API Builder. Now, don't let this title fool you there for your Azure databases, because if I ever look down here on the documentation, okay, it's got like some NoSQL options, Postgres, MySQL, and obviously Microsoft SQL. So all of this is available for those. Now, there are some feature differences because of the underlying database, but most of what I'm going to show you today is going to apply to all of those databases for you. Okay, and as it mentions here, you can hook into local. You certainly can do that, but also you can hook into the Azure-based SQL, Cosmos DB, and things like that. Okay, and by the way, this Data API Builder, yep, it's from Microsoft, but it is open source. So you can go to the GitHub repository and do whatever you want, clone it, contribute, and all the good stuff. Okay, so what I'm going to do is, as usual, I've got my trusty Docker running with a version of SQL running on a Linux or Linux. God, I've got hung up on that again. Platform. So that's running SQL. I think it's the latest one on the images. But anyway, that's running 2022 SQL. Okay, so you can run it locally. In this case, I'm running it in Docker, but it is technically local. Or you can go and run in Azure, basically, which is what I've got here. And just to let you know, this has been out for a little while. I don't know exactly when. I'm trying to find the date. October, yeah, it might have been even a little bit before that, 2023. But certainly, this is a SQL database free offering. Now, it's free forever, basically. You do need an Azure account, but you don't have to pay. And just to address one of the cost things, in case, because you have to put a credit card in and all that sort of stuff. And then people say, well, what happens if, basically I accidentally do something and I start getting charged thousands of dollars or whatever your currency is? Well, the one way around it is if, and I don't know, across the world if this is the same thing, but like with a lot of Visa or MasterCards or things like that, you can get a prepaid card, okay, which still works, and I use it for my Azure subscription, okay. So I put something like, the equivalent of like $10 on it just to get something on the credit card. But should anything happen, by accident, now obviously if you choose to go and try to, do something and you've gone past all the warnings about it's going to start charging you, then, well, there's not much you can do about that. Yeah, Azure and Microsoft will obviously come after you to try to get that money. But obviously, if you've got a bit of common sense and you do things like that, I think this is fine. And like I say, otherwise, just use it for, you can use it locally in your own data center or whatever it is. But the fact is, you get 32 gig of storage and backup storage, and you essentially get 100,000 vCore seconds per month. Now, realistically, that's not a full month's worth, but it sort of is if you're running it, a few days a week type of thing for development. Okay, you can have a look anyway at the proper specs. I'll put the links in the details below. But what you can do is when you've got your free SQL Azure database, again, don't have to do it. Run it in Docker. You can go get Docker Desktop. You can get SQL or whatever your flavor of database is locally. That's still an option. But the idea is, as you can see there, the pricing tier is this free general purpose one. Okay, if I just click on there, you can see it'll tell you what you've been using and all this and blah, blah, blah. It'll tell you how much you've used, how far you've got through the month and all that sort of stuff. But the key thing is the free database offer. Now, it does default. You can only have one database, obviously. It's free. It's 32 gigs, so, so you can see there, if you start to change any of these things, be aware it will tell you that you're going to start getting charged. But what will happen is the behavior by default is when you've reached your limit, it will auto pause until the next month. Okay. Now, obviously, you can continue using the databases for additional charges. Now, it's not a huge amount. This type of setup with 2 vCores and things like that, you wouldn't be looking at a lot of money anyway. Okay, so if you do want to do that, you can set up alerts on your billing and stuff like that. But honestly, leave it at this one, and all it's going to do is pause until the next month. Okay, so it's not a bad option for 32 gig for pretty much the whole month of use. Okay, so that's what I've got. Okay, I've got my database running, and by the way, at the moment my database, as you'll see, has got one table in it called users, and there's about 2 records in there. So it's I don't think I'm actually using a lot of space at all, as you can see, just over 6 meg. Okay, but anyway, so essentially what we're going to do is hook up Data API Builder to say, okay, I've got this database, local or in Azure or wherever, and I want to expose and get a REST API because I don't want to just write a .NET app or whatever app just to serve up, create, read and update, delete operations. Okay. And again, don't be fooled that you're not just limited to Azure. Remember, you can run on Postgres, MySQL as well. Okay, there's documentation for those. And also, you're not exposing the whole database. I just want to make that clear. Even down to a table and row level that you've got. So you'll see down in some of the concepts, I think it's under, is it how to running a row level security? And there's a couple of other things about down to field level security as well. So the first thing you need to do is essentially install the, if we have a look, I think it'll show us, install the Data API builder. And you can do that with a .NET command there, because ultimately it's a .NET application, but it's saving you having to write it just to do the basic CRUD, create, update, and delete operations. Okay, so there's some fairly straightforward information there, and ultimately what you end up with is, if I just make sure I'm in the right environment, you end up with DAB. Okay, so DAB is Data Access API Builder, and you can see you can initialize, you can add, you can do all these sorts of things. But anyway, but the point being is what you end up with, and again, there's some really good examples in here. So when you go through the install, it shows you how to configure a local database, but as you'll see, you can actually connect to an Azure database in a very similar way. It's just the connection string. Okay, and like I say, you have to create these configuration files, and the way that works is that you can give this sort of dab init command here. Okay, you've got the type, Microsoft SQL or MySQL or Postgres or whatever it might be. Are you in development mode or production, connection strings, and a few other things like that. Okay, so that sets up the connection to the database, and then you can add the tables. Okay, so in my case, I've created this init dab.init. I've given the connection string of my Azure SQL database, which is free, and then I've added my dab add. Well, in my case, it wasn't author; it's called users. Okay, and I've put dbo.users and anonymous because who needs security? But of course, that's where you can get into. You've got all about authentication and authorization down here. Okay, and like I said, you can implement JWT. It's got all the bearer token stuff. Local, you can use Azure authentication if you want, but you can have a read of the authentication. But right now, we're just playing around, so it's just anonymous. But obviously, keep that in mind. You wouldn't want to do this for production. Okay, so the idea is, what you can do is when you've set that up, and the configuration file, by the way, sorry, I should have shown you that. When you've done these two steps, I've got it open in VS Code. Okay, there we go. All right, so you'll end up with a configuration file like this. Now, it generates this, so don't be put off with the amount of lines of JSON here. Okay, it does generate it. And the key things really are the database type that we've just mentioned anyway, the connection string, which I've got in a special environment. So that's protecting my username and password in there. But it is just a connection string. Just to show you what I mean, if I just switch back to Azure here, we can have a look down in here for my connection strings. Okay, so you can actually pick whichever one. Now, usually it's going to be, I think, something like this. Okay, you've got the Microsoft Entra password authentication that you can tie to. You can, but I've for the moment, for me, just playing around, I've used just this SQL authentication one here. Okay, so that is really my whole connection string. I've put my own password in, obviously, and that is what you're seeing in that environment stream, but you're not going to see it because there's no point. Okay, but that's why you don't have to hard code it. It's in an environment variable. Okay, so ultimately what you can then do is say, what runtimes do you want? Okay, so I've got REST, and you can see there I've got a path API. Yep, but also why not? Let's have GraphQL in there as well. Okay, allow introspection. Well, that's to allow GraphQL to see the schema and do some IntelliSense sort of picking up. If you don't know about GraphQL, that's an interesting subject on its own, but you probably know about REST, you know, the usual sort of REST APIs. Okay, you've got the CORS configuration. By default, it allows anything to connect, but it's only ringing locally. And at the moment, I've got authentication because I've got static web apps from Azure. Now, that is important when you come to publish this. And there's a whole bit about how and what to use there anyway, and mode development. Okay. Now, out of my database, like I've mentioned, I've got a table called users, and that's all I've got. It's literally got a couple of bits and pieces. Okay, so as you can see, permissions, I've got anonymous. Yep, not ideal for production, but for this, perfectly okay. Right, so what I can do is if I go back to my command prompt, that's what I was trying to do. What you can do with dab, you can do dab validate first. Okay, and that will make sure that all the connections can be made and that it can see the tables and all of that good stuff. Okay, and it's very simple. You can, like I say, there's telemetry that you can add as well for monitoring and all that sort of stuff. And there's a few things you can export the GraphQL schema as well, and there's a few other bits and pieces as well, and you can update if you've changed obviously that table or tables. You can update and it will reflect with the new changes. And by the way, one thing I should have mentioned is that in the configuration file that's behind the screen here, okay, I've got just user at the moment. You can use views instead of tables. You can, oh sorry, it's there actually. You can use store procedures as well, but also you can actually have joins as well. Okay, so in the documentation, just to be clear about that one, in the documentation back there, there's things like about joining. I think it's under how to, or somewhere in here. I think it might be under tutorials. No, okay, I can't find it straight away, but essentially relationships. There we go. There's views, store procedures, and relationships. So you can actually have you know, one-to-many relationships and all sorts of things there as well. Okay, but that's the idea, is you get this JSON configuration, and then what you can do is simply go dab start. And if anybody's ever used .NET, you'll notice this is a very similar looking .NET application running. Okay, but of course it's done all the hard work for us. Okay, so if I have a look, I've got, here we go, I've got localhost 5000. So when you look at where it's running from there by default. Okay, you can override all of this, of course, not a problem. But basically, what happens by default, and you can specify this to be on or off, is it will give you Swagger. So to test your API, you know, you can run, you know, run Swagger basically. So if I just refresh that, okay, it's got author for some reason. Why have I got author in there? I think it's actually cached. But anyway, but the point being is you've now got a you know, a Swagger interface to basically get access to your database via the Data API builder, ultimately. So, yeah, API author isn't there, or it actually, I think I didn't change the name. I do apologize. I've got to update, funny enough, the dab update command, but it did bring back data. And as I mentioned, I had 2 records, and there they are. Okay, so the idea is you can go get by ID, so you could look at the IDs down there. I've got GUIDs at the moment, and off you go. But also, because I'd specified GraphQL, I've got in it. By the way, it already provides, like I say, you can turn Swagger on or off, but also for the GraphQL, it uses Nitro. Okay, already out the box. So all of this was generated straight from Data API Builder, DAB. Okay, and as you can see, I've got a very simple GraphQL query. Users, that's my table. The items that I want, so the items is like your table, if you like, what's in the table. And I've got name and email. And if I run that, okay, you see, yeah, I could clear it and rerun it again, but you can see it's brought back the same data. I've specified I want name and email, and that's what I've got out from GraphQL. So, yeah, so that is absolutely amazing, really. And like I said, the key bit is the security. You can drill down. You can, like you've seen already in that JSON, you can specify only the tables that you want, and really there is another level down from this where you can expose just fields, and by default it is secure. By default it will not expose any other objects that are not listed here. Okay, so yeah, I think that's a pretty interesting one to expose an API and GraphQL over databases for certain situations, and thrown into the bargain, you've got a, you know, if you want to take advantage of it, a free Azure SQL database of 32 gig, no less. So anyway, I hope you found that interesting. Let me know. Please like and subscribe if you want to. You don't have to. But anyway, the unicorns will be happy. Anyway, have a good day. Have a good week. And I will catch you on the next one.